did not hit her. It's not true. It's bullshit. I did not hit her. I did not. Oh, hi, Mark.
When I was younger, I always brought this DVD player with me on family trips, and there were 3 movies I always brought with me: Revenge of the Sith, Shark Tale, and The Room. And somehow, out of those 3, The Room ended up aging the best. It's a beautiful concoction of good artistic intentions and a complete misunderstanding of language, both cinematic and human, that has seen enough success over the past decade to spawn a thriving fan base, a book, and a movie. In addition, it's been very lucky to come to fame during a time when ironically watching so bad it's good movies is being more enjoyed than ever before. Movies like The Room, Birdemic, Troll 2 are beloved precisely because they fail so spectacularly. I've made some of my closest friends by watching The Room. I've been to a midnight screening that the director Tommy Wiseau attended. I even had my first kiss to the movie. And no, not during the sex scenes. It got me thinking, does music have its own equal to The Room? In today's case study, we're diving into the concept of music that is so bad, it's good. First off, let's define what it means for music to be so bad it's good. The only research on the subject is a 2016 study which defined ironically enjoying music as music that is enjoyed because of being bad, despite being bad, or for different reasons than intended. I'll be mostly looking at music that fits in the first and third categories, since they relate more to the kind of movies I'll be comparing them to. In the same study, they also defined values derived from music listening to see how this kind of music differs from just general music enjoyment. They found that music enjoyed because it's bad held a unique value that general music enjoyment did not: mockery, and the social benefit it provides. Next, let's try to understand why some terrible movies are so loved and how that would translate to music. Like I said, the thing that makes The Room so special is the disconnect between the artist's intentions and the final product. The Room, and many films like it, isn't successful just because it's bad. It's successful because Tommy Wiseau's massive blinding hubris turned a film about a love triangle into a grotesque behemoth involving breast cancer, football, framed pictures of spoons, long establishing shots of the Golden Gate Bridge, even longer sex scenes, a kinda jammin' soundtrack, and quotable lines aplenty. Another thing to keep in mind is the difference between making bad films and making bad music. Both film and music are art forms, and thus are open to subjective opinions and discussions on artistic intent and results. But film has more aspects to it that can be done in an objectively bad way. For instance, let's take a look at a scene from another bad movie, Birdemic.
Hey, it was nice running into you at Half Moon Bay.
Yeah, it was nice meeting you.
So, how's your day?
My day's going well. How's yours?
Great. I made a big sale today.
Good, fantastic.
Thanks.
I closed a big job offer today with Victoria's Secret.
Wow, congratulations. I think you'll look great in those lingerie.
So many things we take for granted in movies are terrible here. Bad lighting, bad sound mixing, bad editing. And maybe you could argue that those mistakes are intentional, but it's kind of hard to see how those creative decisions would have enhanced the viewing experience, especially considering that it's just a scene of 2 people talking on the phone. On the other hand, music is far more subjective, and even when its fundamental parameters are perceived as being bad, it's easier to make the case that it's intentional. A great example of this is Captain Beefheart's Trout Mask Replica, a classic album that was written and performed intentionally to sound like this.
Quietly the rain played down our last of ashes.
For a musical work to be comparable to The Room, it would have to embody its hubris, yet achieve similar results. Now let's rattle off some musical examples, starting with the most recent.
Ascension.
Angelic to the Core is a double album by former child star Corey Feldman, who describes it as a sound for the ages. Corey worked on this album for a decade, he arranged and performed most of it himself, and enlisted the likes of Snoop Dogg, Fred Durst, Doc Ice, and members of the Black Eyed Peas and Pink Floyd. How did it turn out? When Corey said this was a sound for the ages, I think he meant a sound for 2009, because these songs sound like Kids Bop arrangements of songs from 2009, but just sung by a 46-year-old man. The compositions drag on for too long, the arrangements and mixes are cluttered and hectic, the interludes are pointless and really creepy.
And number 3, and this is the most important, Angels. Don't forget to be sexy.
And Corey as a vocalist never seems 100% comfortable in any style, which isn't helped by the fact that this record is stylistically all over the place. If there's one song that's emblematic of the whole record, it's We Wanted Change, Corey's stab at a jazz standard, complete with an unnecessarily distorted vocal, MIDI instrument parts that are ripped straight from Note Flight, and that goddamn hi-hat. It's the Saint Anger snare of hi-hats. Speaking of Saint Anger, let's talk about Metallica. The famed metal band has 2 albums that could be considered so bad it's good. But Saint Anger already has a known legacy of how bad it is, and I wanted to give the other one a spotlight. That album is... Lulu is a full album collaboration by Metallica and the late Lou Reed. It was based on songs that Lou had written previously, which in turn were based on 2 plays by German playwright Frank Wedekind, who you might know as the writer of Spring Awakening. The lyrics deal with brutal violence and sexuality, as Lou gives spoken word poetry over Metallica playing. I need to make something absolutely clear. These guys loved working together.
A science of the heart and blood and meaning.
Both parties saw this as a chance to branch out from what they were typically known for, and judging from the interviews, they relished the opportunity. There's a bit in a Rolling Stone interview where a performance by Lou leaves the Metallica guys in tears. How did it turn out?
I am the view. I am the table. I am the 10 stories. I am the table.
For an album regarded as horrible, it sure is boring. The instrumentals by Metallica are numbingly repetitive, the spoken word by Lou is consistently dull, and the 2 rarely seem to be playing the same song. Altogether, the album is an uninviting listen, which you can pretty much gather from its opening moments.
I would cut my legs and tits off when I think of Boris Karloff and Kinski in the dark of the moon.
And now for something completely different. Well, mostly different. Farrah Abraham was one of the stars of MTV's 16 and Pregnant and later Teen Mom. Her story became notable because the father of her expected child died while she was filming the show. Years later, she wrote an autobiography about raising a child and being on MTV, and with it, she recorded an album. How did it turn out? Out of all of these albums, this one has to be the most surreal. Sonically, it's not too out there. It's been described as a blend of EDM and generic dance pop. The thing that pushes it further, to me, is the vocals. Similar to Lulu, Farrah never seems to be playing with the rest of the instruments, leading to a disconnected performance. But unlike Lulu, there's a reason. In an interview, the producer of the album said that Farrah never sang to the music while she was recording, and that is so apparent when you listen. The music isn't helped by the lyrics, which are honest to the point of being uncomfortable, and the autotune, which doesn't so much correct Farrah's singing as much as it does turn each note into a pitch range. The best way I can describe it is 808s and Heartbreak if Kanye decided to sing like Sun Kil Moon. And now for our final and most extreme example. Drumroll please. More than any other example so far, I need to give you the full background of this record. One day, Austin Wiggin got a palm reading from his mother, and with it, 3 predictions. 1, he would marry a strawberry blonde woman. 2, he would have 2 sons after his mother died. And 3, his daughters would form a successful music group. The first 2 came true, so Austin set out to make the third also come true. He took his daughters out of school, bought them music instruments and lessons, and eventually the trio known as the Shaggs put out their debut record, Philosophy of the World. You probably know the answer already, but how did it turn out?
Oh, the rich people want what the poor people's got, and the poor people want what the rich people's got.
This album is the best example of a fundamental misunderstanding of musical language. The other albums I've mentioned are bad in their own ways, but I'd say that they still get the basic elements of music right. With this album, things that we take for granted in music, like pitch, rhythm, tempo, are either done poorly or just not there at all. Add the often rudimentary lyrics and song titles such as Why Do I Feel and My Pal Foot Foot, and you have a record that I believe is the closest thing to a music version of The Room.
What a story, Mark.
So what do these 4 albums have in common? First off, all 4 have some greater inspiring factor that led to them being made, or at least made how they were. Whether it's a decade-long passion project, the experience of raising a child alone, a meaningful collaboration, or the fulfillment of a fortune reading, none of these albums were made because of contractual obligations or because the artist just kind of felt like it. Second, while they all had that greater inspiration, the inspiration was often a double-edged sword. Corey may have worked on his album for over a decade, but he was working against a music industry that just didn't want his work. And that's not even going into what he went through as a child actor. The lyrics on Farrah's album deal heavily with the stress of losing a partner and having to raise a child by herself. Austin Wiggin was described by his daughters in the Shaggs as a disciplinarian, who dictated their schedules and forced them to practice songs until he approved of them. And while the partnership between Lou Reed and Metallica was described as mostly positive, it wasn't always harmonious, with Lou challenging Lars Ulrich to a street fight during a heated session. Third, and this might be the most important, not everyone thinks they're terrible. Remember, because music is a more subjective art form, one person's ironic musical trash might be another's unironic treasure. Both Angelic to the Core and My Teenage Dream Ended have defenders, either as so bad it's good music or as intentional examples of quality outsider art. Lulu has seen a slight critical reevaluation over the years, including the late David Bowie saying it was Lou Reed's greatest work. The Shaggs, however, have seen the biggest growth of a legitimate fan base by far. Philosophy of the World first entered the public consciousness because of artists like Frank Zappa and Kurt Cobain professing their love for it. The album has also been referenced in movies like Empire Records and The Perks of Being a Wallflower. Though the most interesting thing to come from their success is also the most recent. They reunited for a festival last year. They played these songs from sheet music. They transcribed these songs to perform them as they were performed on the album. Which brings up an interesting question. Were these songs intended from their conception to be performed like this? I don't freaking know. One of the members of their backing band has said so.
They might not have been able to keep their guitars in tune or to keep a standard 4/4 beat. But, you know, we have a chart for My Pal Foot Foot. It's all there. It's all there. So she knows exactly what she was doing.
And I don't know any of these musicians personally, or any of the other musicians that made the other albums. So it's possible that they could have been made to be intentionally bad. But to subscribe to that line of thinking, in my opinion, takes away some of the magic of these records. People don't get enjoyment from The Room just because they like to crap on bad things. They do genuinely enjoy it. To quote John Darnielle, it's just a different kind of enjoyment. And while the same can't be said for every single bad record out there, I think it can be said for these. So the last question I'd like to ask is, why aren't these records consumed in the same way as bad films? If these records really are comparable to The Room, why are there not listening parties for them? The most basic answer I could find is that it's just a difference in medium. Film is an active experience, requiring most of our attention to properly consume. Music, on the other hand, can either be active or passive, and when it is active, it's usually in isolation. But let's backtrack for a sec and look at that definition of ironically enjoyed music I mentioned earlier. Music that's enjoyed because it's bad, despite being bad, or for different reasons than intended. The music I've covered fits within the first and third categories, but that second category, wouldn't that just be guilty pleasures? Stuff like, I don't know, early Justin Bieber, Nickelback, Anaconda by Nicki Minaj. The research showed that music enjoyed despite its bad quality was actually appreciated in a similar way to general music listening, just with a degree of ironic separation. That separation shows itself to me in a unique way. through memes. We share memes based on a ton of guilty pleasures. In fact, the two most recently released albums I mentioned, being Lulu and Angelic to the Core, spawned memes when they came out. It's no coincidence that Angelic to the Core became known because of a video made by the internet's resident music meme Melon Man. So with any of the definition's three categories, So Bad It's Good music does contribute to the cultural conversation, just like So Bad It's Good movies do, but in a slightly different way. No matter how they're shared, one thing is certain about these albums. They're memorable, which can't be said for music that's mediocre or just fine. We should appreciate these surreal, bizarre albums for what they are and for what they contribute to our culture. As a wise man once said,
If a lot of people love each other, the world would be a better place to live.
oh hi Danny. Danny, two's great but three's a crowd. I did not hit her. It's not true. It's bull. I did not hit her. I did not. Oh hi Mark. What a story, Mark. I'm so glad I have you as my best friend, and I love Lisa so much. Chip, 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 chip.